What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another LUMIX Live, and actually live again for the last couple of weeks. We've had a mix of technical difficulties trying to get last week's recorded session up, and obviously me being out of the studio for a little while has made it a little difficult to get these things out on schedule. But yeah, we are actually back, and we are live in person in the studio. So yeah, super excited to be back. We're going to take it a bit lighter this week. This really just kind of, since this is the last kind of like real live broadcast live stream that we're doing for the rest of this calendar year, wanted to basically just give the opportunity, wrap up some questions that people have had, show some stuff off on the cameras that I've gotten questions about over the last week while I've been away and actually out using the cameras. So share some information, some tips like that on ways to make the camera, particularly I'm using the S5 for the demonstration today, but really just ways that some of the features we've got built into these cameras make capturing both photo and video so much easier than really, in my opinion, pretty much anything else on the market. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that, answering your questions. So if you have a question during the live stream, make sure to tag at LUMIX Cameras before it. I'll be able to see it on my side and actually get you, or hopefully get you an answer for a question that you may have. And yeah, just kind of keep it a little bit loose. These are typically scheduled for about an hour. If we run an hour, that's cool. If we run a little bit shorter than that, then that's also kind of cool. You know, kind of keeping it a little bit more lighthearted this week. So that out of the way, if this is the first ever LUMIX Live that you're joining, these are weekly broadcasts that we do every Thursday at 2 p.m., save for last Thursday, where we talk about tech, we talk about the industry, photography, videography, you name it. We try to cover it on this platform, and really just act as a community for all of you to get questions asked, to collaborate with each other, and really just kind of hang out. So a lot of these things, we've been doing them for a while now. If you have a question during the broadcast, like I said before, you can tag at LUMIX Cameras by just typing at LUMIX Camera, and then that'll just pop up on my side so I can see it and we can address it. Pretty much no questions off the table in these conversations. It's a matter of if I can answer them or not is really just what it would come down to. So feel free to drop your questions in, and we're going to get through them. Before we go into the actual full-blown conversation, I want to remind everybody about LUMIX Pro Services. It's that time of year where a lot of people have either gotten new cameras or you're looking to get a new camera. Here in the United States, we offer two levels of LUMIX Pro Service. We have the red tier and the platinum tier. The red tier is free. That's what gets you your 3-year extended warranty here in the United States. It also gets you the program access in for any kind of service or support that you may need while you're actually using your equipment, and it's free. So if you've just got a camera, you're looking to get into a camera from the LUMIX brand, follow the QR code or the link down in the description, get yourself registered on free with that new camera. It's just a smart thing to do. If you're somebody who likes, you know, that kind of like extra level of service and support on top of the basics that you get, you can always take a look at the Platinum membership that we offer. The Platinum membership offers all of the same benefits that the red tier offers, but some extras in there. You get a really cool exclusive welcome kit, which has a really nice Peak Design slide strap that's customized with LUMIX Pro Service. You also get 20% off out-of-warranty repairs. So if you happen to break a piece of equipment while you're out in the field, traveling, doing whatever, you've got a discount on the repair there. So it lessens the cost if you need to get something fixed that way. You also get an exclusive membership hotline. So if you're someone who would rather speak to a person about an issue you're having, you've got access to that during normal working business hours on the East Coast here in the US. You also get annual sensor cleanings, EVF cleanings, lens calibrations, firmware updates, all that kind of maintenance stuff. If you're someone who doesn't like to do it yourself, just want to send it in and have it prepped for the next season if you're a seasonal photographer. And then probably the biggest thing is that you get 2-day repairs with next day shipping both ways. So if you're really minimized on the downtime that you may not be with your equipment, if for some reason you need to send it in for service and support. So I highly recommend if you're in the US, take a look at the links that we got down in the description for that. If you're joining us from outside of the US, we do also have access to the global portal down there, so you can take a look and see if LUMIX Pro Service is available in your region as well. Yeah, cool. So that's all the kind of housekeeping stuff out of the way. Yeah, let's just jump right into some of these questions we got here. So the first one came up from Richard Williams. It says, Could an updated G9 be out someday? Like maybe a G9 2, a highly advanced still photography only. That would be cool, no video. So there's actually been a lot of people that ask questions like this about modern cameras, right? You want to get a camera. You're primarily a stills photographer, as honestly as I am still. I definitely would categorize myself way more as a stills camera operator as opposed to a video user. And it's just the kind of the logic of I want to get a camera, but I'm never going to use all the video stuff, so I don't want to pay for it. Well, with modern cameras, especially cameras like the G9, and that's probably the best example we have in the lineup currently. That camera always started as a stills first camera, so it didn't really have much of the video features. It had enough, you were able to do 4K 60, things like that, and you still do have some limitations there because of the design of the chassis. Well, as far as designing cameras specifically just for photography anymore, that doesn't really exist. And the reason it doesn't exist is that there's no financial benefit to build a mirrorless camera or digital camera these days without video features as well. You're not going to save any money really by taking certain features out. When you start getting into the exotic features like RAW over HDMI, or like with the GH6 in its case, the fact that we can do ProRes internally, sure, you can find some arguments there in that case where maybe, if those things aren't included, could that bring the cost of the camera down? And those are logical things to think about. But truthfully, a strictly photography-only camera, you're really not going to see these days anymore, because even on the photography side, it can benefit from a lot of the video functionality or video-derived functionality that's being advanced on in the current state of the market. So will a G9 get an update one day? Probably. Honestly, I can't confirm whether or not we're going to do another G9, but if we did, and basically any of the cameras moving forward, know that the mentality of a hybrid product is pretty well inset in what you're going to see in equipment moving forward. They're going to have all the photo features that we normally expect, and they're going to have advancements in the photo side that are all derived from video use cases. Probably the biggest point would be things like live view composite. Live view composite basically is one of those things that, because we know how to work with video files and we can apply some of that logic to the stills mentality, you get a mode in the camera that allows you to do, additive compositions in an image in the camera. So you'll see things like that kind of propagate as we move forward with the new engine that we're working with, like that started with the GH6. So, but a strictly photography-based camera, you probably won't see these days anymore. And the reality is that even companies that do try to make strictly photography cameras, they're usually not popular enough to ever justify making a specific model just like that. So maybe not exactly what you want to hear, but the truth is the vast majority of the video features, you're not paying anything extra for them. The cameras cost what they cost, and the technology costs what it costs to produce. So let's see here. FC, hey, welcome back. Hey, Dave. Hey, Gitfo. FC says, can you comment on the new Leica 12-35 f2.8 lens? Differences from the old version? Yes, I can. There's definitely actually a lot of questions I've seen on the forums about that. So the new iteration of the Leica 12-35 f2.8, it is a refresh of the lenses that we've had out. So we've had, at this point, I think this is the third iteration of the 12-35, and a lot of the changes that have come over the years with those optics have been usually component level. So you see from the first version to the second version, it got better stabilization. It had more precise manual focus motors in it as well. So if you look at firmware updates that we've done by adding things like linear manual focus, you could do that on the second version, but you couldn't do it on the first one because the hardware wasn't in the original one. Stabilization has been higher evolved in the newer lenses too. So in the version 2, it was dual IS2 versus dual IS1, which gave better stabilization in the telephoto side. So that's where some of those iterations came. Now with the third iteration of it, while I've seen a lot of people posting online, but it's the same optic formula. And while it may be the same physical optical formula, if you just look at the lenses and you look at a diagram and you don't really know exactly what you're looking at as far as the details, because those only tell you one part of it, The lens has been refreshed relatively heavily. So new coatings, new overall image quality spec on that lens is what classifies it now as a Leica series. So you're starting to see some of this shift that in Micro Four Thirds, the Leica variants of our lenses, those are considered our top tier. So like our premium class of our lenses. It's the same in the S series. The S series has the S Pros. So from one hand, that's what you see an improvement with. The other is that it does have a closer focus distance now on it. So anyone that's, kind of really worked with that lens and wished it was able to focus a little bit closer, you've got some of that functionality as well. And honestly, within those categories of lenses, that's usually what you're going to see with an update in a kind of workhorse series lens. Workhorse lenses rarely see major departures from known quantities of how they work. And in a lot of cases, it's to bring them in spec with things that we've got, that have been released, like with the GH6. So just better performance with the newer camera, things like that. You also run into things where, component-wise, you have to update after times. Certain components you just may not be sourceable anymore. So you need to upgrade and come out with a new model, which means that it is a new model. It's not a running change anymore for minor little things that would be different. So, yeah, not a drastic difference between the previous one, but differences in where it counts as far as like the image quality and just the overall performance of the lens. It's going to function much better if you're someone, say, with like a GH6. You go with the new one, you know that you're getting the color palette that is found in the Leica series lenses. So the color tonality and the rendering will be different between the original one and the new one, or the original ones and the new one. And then, yeah, just performance and components. So stabilization, coating, stuff like that are all improved on the new model. Yeah, so let's see here. Addy, appreciate the live streams. Well, thank you very much. Do you use a new camera tonight or a new lens? There's something different. No, it's probably just the fact that I'm still fighting off a little bit of jet lag. This is the BS1H box camera with the 35mm f1.8 at f1.8. Maybe the only difference is that I re-white balanced the camera before I started this stream because I changed the temperature of my Elgato key lights a little bit. So yeah, maybe a little bit of a difference there. But yeah, no, the same camera I've been using for the last little over a year. Let's see here. Shareth, why can't we use USB-C for monitoring through mobile phone instead of Wi-Fi, which is unreliable? So, this is a really good question. So, camera hardware, it's usually not at the same iterations that you would see mobile devices and things like laptops and desktop computers operating at. So, I saw a comment somewhere, someone asking about, Thunderbolt 4 or USB 4 is the new standard. Why can't cameras adopt that? Well, it's a lot easier said than done because of the hardware and the logic that needs to also be included for those ports to operate at those speeds with those full suite of specifications. So typically in a camera, the USB ports are going to be built based on throughput spec. So as an example, the GH6 has a 10 gigabit USB-C port on that, which means that we can do things like SSD video recording because now the speed is fast enough to keep up with stuff like ProRes running at 1.9 gigabit per second over USB. Yes, it's a USB-C connection. Yes, it's ultra fast, but that doesn't mean that it has all of the same functionality that, say, USB 4.0 or Thunderbolt 4 offers within that USB-C connector. When it comes to tethering to a mobile phone, that's starting to make a transition. With the GH5 Mark II, that was the first camera that we offered that capability with, that you can operate the LUMIX Tether app over USB now instead of over Wi-Fi. And that actually does, as you pointed out, that does actually increase reliability for things like wireless streaming. So if you're someone who uses, say, a GH5 Mark II for wireless streaming direct to YouTube or Facebook or any of those platforms, or you want to use it to send out to your encoding software, the USB connection can provide you a much stronger, more reliable signal. That's why we can do 4K 30p when you've got it wire tethered to your mobile device. It cuts that one extra chain of Wi-Fi out for how it's actually sending the connections out. And that's really the start of it. You're going to start seeing more stuff over time as that technology in the camera side of the world, as that just gets built out further and further, and as the camera processors are designed to start working with more and more of that level of functionality. Because the other thing to remember too is that camera processors versus what you would think of in an SoC for a mobile device or a desktop processor that you find in a PC or Mac, they're very different animals. SoCs are designed to do all things across the board. Camera processors are designed to function with what you design a camera for. So a little more simplified scope in what they are designed for, but we're starting to see more things be integrated into the development of those processors. You just typically see major jumps when you have major revisions in processors, like the GH6, first camera that we're able to do USB SSD recording, first camera that we're able to do punch in while video recording, stuff like that. That was thanks to a new revision of the engine built into that camera. And you'll see more cool things like that move forward as we now begin working more and more on the new platform as opposed to what we worked with in the previous generation cameras. So even to the S5 compared to the GH6, you'll see that the GH6 has a lot more functionality it can do, and it can do it more efficiently because it's a totally new processor. And that ties back into that USB functionality. So hopefully that was answered your question there, Sheriff. I think I'm pronouncing your name right. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. If I'm not, I apologize. Gitfo says, is it just me, or is the GH6 AF noticeably worse than 24 hertz versus 23976 at 60? One of the things with focusing systems, specifically on cameras like the GH6, is that the more frame rate you can supply it, the faster the system can work, the more data it's being worked with. And DFD is a system that is designed with the more data you can provide it, the faster and more accurate it's going to be. 24 hertz, so actually being in 24 hertz cinema, so when you change the camera's system frequency over, changes a lot of things about the camera. And truthfully, this day and age, it's rare to find situations where you have to be in 24.00 frames per second. It used to be that, cinema broadcast, you had to be in 24 frame, but now 23976 is pretty much just as accepted in the vast majority of places too. You also don't have issues like with audio syncing and long-term recordings in 23976 versus 24. So as far as the AF system goes, in true 24 frames per second, what I've been told by some users that do have need for it, like where you're doing print copy, so you're actually using the camera to take film and convert it. In situations like that, one, they're not using autofocus, you're using manual focus lenses, typically because you're doing more scripted work. But if you do need to use the autofocus system in true 24 cinema, typically you can go in there and you can play with some of the speed and sensitivity settings, which will speed the system up to compensate for the 24 hertz refresh rate versus the 23976 and the 60 hertz or 5997 hertz refresh rate for NTSC versus PAL. So that's some of the tip that I'd provide there, is play around with some of the AF custom settings, and you can speed the system up in 24 hertz. Joseph says, I'd love to know why LUMIX, not sure. Jonathan, thanks for doing these. Makes me feel closer to the brand. One, are there any ways to mitigate GH6's smearing when shooting with light sources like windows and frame? Second, for the hybrid prosumer, would you take the S5 20-60 kit or the GH6 12-35 f2.8? Sales are looking good right now, and it seems that the faster MFT lens should help with depth of field difference. So, let me talk about the first question. So if you are shooting ultra high dynamic range scenarios where you've got an incredibly blown out highlight next to a very crushed shadow, any CMOS sensor can be set up to create basically the same issue. Reds do it. Blackmagic does it. Everybody does it. It is CMOS sensor hardware uh, kind of characteristics. Easy way that you can basically try to mitigate if you have to shoot in that very specific scenario, and in 99% of the rest of the time, I can tell you from working with people that are making tons of money on these cameras, they're not running into it. If you're in situations where you're kind of having an issue getting rid of it, one, make sure dynamic range boost is turned on and try to stick to the native ISO that the sensor is designed for. So if you have DR boost turned on the GH6, make sure you're at about 2000 ISO. But then also watch what your exposure is doing. Remember that you have a lot more highlight dynamic range in the camera than a lot of people think because of the way that sensor is designed to work. So if you use the tools like waveform, vector, not really vector scope for color, but if you use waveform, if you use luminance spot meter, and you look and you actually measure out your scene and you say, okay, that particular window is so incredibly blown out in this particular frame because I'm trying to lift my shadows up so far, but you still have a massively dark shadow. Two things there. One, no camera's going to be able to pull that much dynamic range off in one shot. None of them will. So typically, expose so that you're protecting your highlight, which means use something like luminance spot meter. If you're in Vlog, put it into the window, go up to where you can see the actual stops counting up. And I think in Vlog on the GH6, you're looking at 5.5 stops over. So bring it right up to 5.5 stops. You know that you're protected in your highlights. Then in the shadows, start working on lighting. Start adding light in to bring your shadows up. When you do that, one, you're going to get an infinitely better looking piece of footage out of it when you grade it, instead of just working with the available light there. Lights are your friend when you're doing any of this stuff, especially I know even in weddings where things are relatively fast paced. Pick up a couple of those little Aperture MC lights that are little battery powered ones and just have a couple of them with you, because you can easily just click one of those. They're magnetic, drop it in there, add a little bit of kicker light and some fill light into the shadowed region of that image, and boom, the issue's gone. The issue typically shows up when you're trying to push a digital sensor further than they were ever designed to go. And again, as I said, this is something that you can make any digital sensor do. It's a matter of when you're starting to push the ragged ends of dynamic range, that's where you can see it more. If you watch a lot of movies on Netflix and Amazon Prime, you can spot the mainline cinema cameras that everyone covets. You can see them doing it too. It's all about lighting. The more light you can add to the frame, the more you can actually balance the exposure out and get yourself a frame that, one, is a hell of a lot easier to grade in post and it's going to look better, and two, mitigates just any other challenges that you really may have in the framing there. So that's my answer for your first part of it. The second part of it, looking between an S5 with a 20-60 or a GH6 with a 12-35. Truthfully, in those two categories, with those two lenses, I'd easily say 9 out of 10 people that I ever talk to when they're asking about, hey, which of these two cameras should I buy? Depth of field is never a question that actually gets asked in the real world. For a lot of us that are in this day in, day out, yeah, sure, we look at, which lens is going to give me the better depth of field, which lens, is going to give me the better characteristics in the look. But directly between those two kits, you've got two vastly different optic setups on them. The S5 with the 20-60 being the first, kind of kit lens that actually does that 20mm wide angle. The question really would be more, do you want something that's got much wider field of view for general photography and video? Or do you want something that has much higher video spec and things like 4K 120? Those are where it would come into. And at that point, if you're more on the photography side of the industry, it's still a bit of a toss-up. I typically will bounce back and forth between a GH6 and the S5, and it's going to depend on whether or not I want to really push depth of field for my mentality, even though I just said usually that doesn't come up. But if I know that that's something that's of concern to me, is I want ultra shallow depth of field, then yeah, I'm going to grab my S5 and that 20-60. At 60mm, you get better compression on full frame than you do in micro four thirds with the same apertures. So it can give you a better result. But the GH6 can do just as solid of a job there too. You know, if you shoot in high resolution, handheld high resolution mode, you're going to get some stellar performance out of it as well. Still images, you get some pretty solid flexibility if you actually push your exposure brighter than you would normally do for raw photos, because you have more headroom by about a stop and a half. It's just different tools. If prices being the same between them, look at which system you want to invest into. The S series being full frame, know that, you know, you've got access to the entire S series line of lenses, plus the lenses available from Sigma and Leica. So if there are optics in there that you like and that you are looking forward to wanting to shoot, go with that series. If you've been working in Micro Four Thirds forever and you really like the way the system works and the size benefits that you can get on most of the optics, then go with that one. So yeah, in a blind test, with 10 people, you get 5 pick one, 5 pick the other, truthfully. So let's see here. And I think I've seen DR boost kind of matches the S5's dynamic range. When used correctly, you can get some pretty solid dynamic range on the GH6 that rivals full frame dynamic range. That is correct. Scullerhead, please can you make a wide angle fast pancake lens? We don't have an option for L mount for light setup for street photography. Trust me, it will sell like pancakes. See, the funny thing about trusting anybody outside of a market analyst, it's hard. There are a lot of lenses that I want to see that I would believe would sell ridiculously well, and you look at the actual analytics of the market, and they would just very easily prove us all wrong. So, as far as pancake lenses, I think the closest that exist in the industry, and I know these are not, I think what you're referencing is pancake, are things like the Sigma, the C series, so the contemporary series. They're probably the closest to pancake in full frame. There's a lot of challenges to make a very high quality, well controlled, whether it's optical or if you have to revert to doing more software correction for pancake lenses, because the optic formulas tend to have to be very simple. And in the modern day and age where people are always after the, you know, kind of the best, MTF curve that you can find, and you want the sharpest, most clinical thing so you can put a filter on it. All of those things come into play. It doesn't mean that we won't ever make pancake lenses or that you won't see them that often, but there's a reason why you don't see many of them in full frame. I believe there's only like one company that really still sticks to making pancake lenses in APS-C and full frame, and they're great lenses. I would never argue against them, but yeah, it would be cool to see one. I would tend to lean towards the analysts and kind of say that they probably wouldn't sell as well as we would all think they would sell, but they would be cool lenses, and I think that's actually one of the cool things where companies like TT Artisan and some of those other manual companies that are coming out, they're making some really cool options in that area that are mounted for L mount and Micro Four Thirds and all that stuff, because they can make the simplified optics because you're not worrying about electronics and focus and all that kind of stuff. So some of those options do exist, but probably not something that you'll see from us right now. Val3RO, what's the widest lens? Depends on the platform you're looking at. If you look on Micro Four Thirds, you can go all the way down to, I believe, 7.5 millimeter. If you look at the Micro Four Thirds world as a whole, within Panasonic Lumix, we've got the 8 millimeter fisheye, which would be ultra wide, but that is a fisheye lens. In full frame with the S series, you've got a 14 millimeter, couple of them, which would be from the Sigma line, 16 to 35 from the Lumix line, which would be an S Pro. So that's usually about the widest that you'll see right now. If you go into Micro Four Thirds and you need to have a zoom rating with that, that's where we've got like our 10 to 25, which is an f1.7, which is a solid wide angle. So you're getting about 20 millimeter field of view. Yeah, so that's probably what you got. Right around in that range. And there's probably some that I'm missing if you talk to other people that are way more versed in some of the third-party optics or non mainline camera brand optics. There's tons of them out there. Like I said, I know there's a 7.5 millimeter that's out there that's really cool. So yeah, and a lot of those lenses you're going to see are designed more for drone use, but they'll work just as fine for standard day-to-day photography and videography with them. Let's see here. Sorry, I'm getting my voice back after being on planes for the last 3 days. Here we go. Versal Studios. Will there be an update for True 24 on the S5, S1H, BS1H? Not. The S1H and the BS1H do True 24. You have to change the system to 24 hertz. The S5 probably not. Vertical Studio. Will there be an open gate external RAW with the S1H, S5 available in the future for cameras? This is one that does get asked a lot, and I know Matt Fraser and I ask this question a lot as well. I think part of it right now has to do with how raw video is being sent out to the recorders. There's a lot of moving parts that have to be in alignment so that whatever signal's being sent from the camera is actually able to be recorded by an external device. I think that's why we don't see open gate recording. So like the 3:2 aspect ratio, the full sensor height and width, over HDMI data for RAW at this point. Doesn't mean that it's not possible. Just means that right now there's probably still barriers up as to making it work in a reliable sense. It'd be cool to have it, but if it's not reliable every single time you use it, that causes a much bigger challenge of when you would ever deploy something like that. Let's see here. Brennan, wondering if it's possible to get an anamorphic D-squeeze in photo mode on things like the GH6. Love my Sirui anamorphic lenses and would love to take photos with them too. I 100% agree. I would love to have anamorphic D-squeeze in the photography mode. I've asked for it. I know Matt Fraser has asked for it. The more all of you ask for it, the higher probability we have to get stuff like that either added in firmware or into future camera development. Given the fact that anamorphic lenses are still continuously getting more and more cost effective versus where they were when we were really first initially pushing anamorphic functionality in a consumer level camera, that adds to the ability for our team to look at it and say, okay, this actually is an area where this is a useful feature. Some of that stuff you just have to really, it takes a little bit longer than I think a lot of us expect because you have to get everyone on board to understand, what the actual real world value is with it. Right now, if you want to get close to anamorphic, it's not really the same, but we have the 2:1 aspect ratio in the camera, or 65:24. You have ultra wide photo aspects, but that's assuming that you're using circular lenses. If you're looking at doing D-squeeze, it's just some of that logic. So sound off in the forums, in our comments on the ends of these videos whenever we post them. The more you let us know that those are features that you want to see, the more we can go to the engineering team and work out the feasibility of adding them in, either in future firmware updates or if it's something that would need to be future camera. The truth is, you would not actually get in the photo side, it would not give you a de-squeezed photo, usually because the processing to do that and the choice of, are you trying to do a 2x de-squeeze, a 1x de-squeeze, or a 1.8, 1.5, 1.3, 3.3. All of that adds so much complexity into the camera that probably wouldn't happen, but if we can get a de-squeeze view option, so you can at least frame it, and then when you bring it into post, you can do your de-squeeze in post. That's the kind of stuff that we would, I think, relatively be able to execute on. Let's see here. Scholarhead, can you tell me how fast the sensor readout in 1080 full frame? I found the readout in 4K, APS-C or full frame, but no info for full HD, and does the camera downscale from 6K when shooting in 1080 full frame? Scholarhead, it's going to depend on the camera that you're looking for. If you let me know in the chat which camera you're referencing, I can probably get you a close answer. I don't know what the exact readout speed is for 1080 in all of our cameras, But if you're referencing a camera like the GH6 takes everything from that 5.8K or 5.8K full width and uses that for downsampling. Even the 4K 120 is taken from the full sensor and then downsampled to 4K. So that sensor has a really fast readout, and then as you go lower resolution, you read out faster. When you punch in, you read out even faster. But yeah, it's going to be camera dependent because it's what sensor hardware and what processor hardware is being used. So primarily more the sensor hardware. Sensors can only ever read out as fast as they're designed to. So give me a little more info and I'll see if I can get you an answer for that one. Good to explain that stripping video features will not make any cameras cheaper. Mirrorless is the integration of stills and video using good CAF. Yeah, pretty much. Throwback to the first question. Yeah, stripping video features out just these days doesn't actually save any money. There are certain areas where, yes, it can, but the vast majority of cameras that you see across the board, like GH6 excluded because that's got ProRes internally, yeah, you usually don't necessarily see costs involved there. If you look at a camera like the S1, and I know this is going to be a controversial topic for a lot of people, but the S1, you needed a paid service upgrade for that camera to do things like RAW over HDMI because the camera wasn't necessarily designed to do it to begin with. The S1H was the first one that was designed with a lot of those kinds of capabilities in mind. So when the S1 was able to hardware, we were able to confirm that the hardware was able to do it. Yeah, there was a service unlock that you had to do to get that camera to be able to do those features. And it shows that some people that really wanted them, yeah, sure, it's a reasonable upgrade in to go to that path, and it changes the camera. But for a lot of people that have no need for any of that stuff, you don't have to go down that route, so you get to save yourself a couple of bucks on that camera. Yeah, so a little bit of differences there. Let's see here. PM, what do you think about LiDAR as an in-camera focusing system? I don't believe it. Truthfully, because of the fact that LiDAR is an external solution, and even if you look at early iterations, and we'll go way back, if you go back to early Contax rangefinder film cameras, there were a few of them that had phase autofocus that was attached through an external lens. So you had the main lens here, and then you had a little window, as I cover the mic, a little window off to the side that would read out your distance information and tell the lens to focus. There are a lot of challenges with that. You cover that sensor up, your focusing's gone. You're not working in the exact same focal plane, well, your focus isn't always going to be that accurate. They have to be calibrated if it's an external thing. If it's internal, you have to make sure that, again, that window's in an area where it's never going to be covered up. There's way too many variables that can't be controlled for the system to work reliably. The other thing is that LiDAR has a finite distance that it can work. It's a finite distance that it can be accurate at. And even if you look at those options that are out there today that add LiDAR on for like cinema lenses where you can rig them up and use follow focuses and stuff, even those things, they're nowhere near from perfect or really a primetime reliable tool yet. They're cool. They look really cool to see a cinema anamorphic lens able to focus like this because you're looking at something that has no focus capabilities and now you've added some. But yeah, as far as something like that ready for prime time, we're still years away from, I think, seeing any of that stuff be prime time in a camera that has to be able to work with someone who has no experience in cameras either. So, let's see here. Alan says, I think the main reason folks ask for a photo-only camera is to eliminate the need for heat dissipation for smaller camera bodies. Yeah, I can definitely see that. However, even modern digital cameras, just regular stills cameras, I won't name names in the industry, but even some cameras that when you're using them in the photo modes without any of the video features, they still can overheat. Cooling is a fact of just reality with modern digital cameras. The more we want to push them, the higher resolution, the more computational photography you want to run in them, the faster burst rates that you want to put in them, cooling is still a very important part of it, and that's not going to go anywhere. So if you design it to be done properly. And we'll exclude cameras like the S1H and the GH6 from that because they are very heavily skewed towards video use. Cameras still need to be able to be cooled. Between materials being used, whether or not you work with a bespoke cooling system that minimizes down on size or integrates out the back. I think the industry as a whole is still working out what the best path is for the way to design those systems. The S1H was the first one to ever integrate an active cooling system, and look at how many companies have now started saying, oh, well, you know, that's actually a good idea. Let's do that too. It's just the way that it is. We always kind of go up and down in these trends where we find something really cool, we find a way to mitigate an issue that some may have, and then it just gets refined version after version after version. So I'm sure we'll see, you know, more slick cooling solutions for cameras as we move forward that make it where this just really isn't an issue anymore. But even stills cameras will need to have some sort of cooling system, whether it be active or passive, or a combination of the two. Know that with the LUMIX line of systems, though, we also rate our cameras to a much higher standard than anybody else in the industry. We are proud of it. The fact that a GH6, the S1H, you know, they're rated to run truly unlimited recording, which does not just mean video. That means mixed use of this. If you're jumping back and forth between photo and video, they're rated to operate up to 104 degrees and to do it reliably. So if you're working with our camera and you need a spec that's in it, it's going to work up to 104 degrees. You know, here in the US, you know, for about half of the year, you're seeing people that experience, you know, well over 80 degree high average temperatures. So cameras that are rated for 70 degrees, you walk outside and go shoot a wedding with it. Even if it's a photo camera, you're going to get heat warnings on the camera. Ours, you know, you don't have to worry about that stuff. So reliability is also part of where that comes in, even in the still side. Let's see here. Where was I? So there's a new third 12 to 35 millimeter under the Leica umbrella. Not seeing it anywhere online. Yep. Okay, it looks like you found it. How much bigger would the new 12 to 35 be if it were an f2 versus 2.8? Probably a bit bigger. The other challenge that you run into there is that it's a totally new optic design at that point, so costs would be much higher. Designing brand new anything will always be a higher cost than revising and refining what's there already. So, you know, and the difference between 2 to 2.8 usually isn't really that big of a difference, especially with how cameras perform these days. Used to make a much bigger difference when you were working with, you know, film stock where you had 800 ISO. That's what you worked with. You know, a full stop on 800 ISO film was a big deal. Now, you know, a third of a stop, a half stop, even up to, you know, a full stop is not a visual difference anymore for cameras. So that depth, the depth of field or the light gathering capabilities for lenses, it's actually down more to the light transmission properties versus the actual stated f-stop. So a lot of times what you'll see is that a 2.8 lens that's designed now versus a 2.8 lens that was designed 8-10 years ago, the new lens will actually be transmitting a true 2.8 through it. So if you ever look up the difference between T-stops and f-stops, T-stops is transmission. You'll see that newer lenses actually transmit more light through them versus what the measured f-stop value is, because f-stop is only a measurement of the opening to the iris. T-stops are the actual transmitted light through it, and modern lenses have much higher levels of true transmission of light. So here, Tim says, need to photograph a lot of flat artwork with a G9. Got a recommendation for best lens to consider? Tim, I actually think I think you had asked this question a little while ago, but at least I think it was you. If it's not, I apologize. If you're doing art copy and things like that, usually macro lenses are going to be your best friend in this case. There's a lot of old school macro lenses that you can mount through converters onto a camera like the G9. And they're going to have a really good flat field. Even lenses like our 30 millimeter it's an f2.8 macro is going to be a really, really stellar lens for it. You get a nice flat field of focus. And then you combine that with the high resolution shot mode, and you're going to get some really good high quality art copies. So I would consider some of those lenses for you. Randy, could the BGH1 get SSD recording functionality? No. The hardware spec for the USB port on that is not high bandwidth enough for SSD recording. That started with the GH6. So, let's see here. Douglas, I'm a longtime stills amateur converting to MFT in G9 and accoutrements in 2019. At least I think I pronounced that word right. Love it. Would you consider in 2023 arranging blogs for stills photography? Yeah. I mean, while the vast majority of the stuff that, like we always end up talking about on these streams and different platforms, while video tends to take the primary conversation, stills, I mean, yeah, getting your work out there, if it's something that you're passionate about, go create a site that houses your portfolio. If you're someone that's worried about loading, your photos and videos up on a site that's controlled and owned by another company, read through the terms of service for using those websites. Do you maintain your rights? Do you keep them? Is it a way to share the content with people? If you're looking to do it as a job and you want to be able to use it as a way to share your work and, kind of get people to notice your work, then, it's a lot harder to do it on your own site. You need to really work on things like advertising and just how to get your brand out there. That's why anyone that's in photography, I highly recommend go to school, take business courses on marketing and accounting. It will save you a lot in the end. But yeah, creating an online platform, an online portal where you just have your work there for people to see, that's awesome. The biggest piece of advice I can share from the years that I had going through school for photography is curate it. Go through the photos and don't just post, like, if you go on a trip and you have, say, 1,000 photos that you love. If you're doing this because you want to show a portfolio of what you can do, don't just throw all of them up there. Curate them. If you've got 1,000 photos, pick the 10 best. That's it. And really lean in on those 10 best. Take a moment, go through it, objectively try to curate your work. It's easy to throw up a ton of content and just see what sticks. But if you curate it much heavier and you really kind of objectively look at an image and say, well, I like this, but from this perspective, maybe it's not the strongest of the ones I have. Curate it down into a smaller group and lead with those. That was the biggest point I always got from my professors in school about commercial photography and how if you ever want to use it to try to get jobs somewhere, you want to show that you can really bring your work down into a real kind of cohesive message for a story you're trying to tell. Even if it's just that you want to share, hey, I went to so-and-so place and I love these photos and you want to share it. If you can curate it down, it's going to look so much more professional than something like Flickr or 500px where you just see thousands of photos loaded all at once. Jonathan says, thank you so much. I definitely didn't ask easy questions and you answered them. Thanks again. Merry Christmas. Well, thank you. Like I said, I always try to at least get answers the best I can. They're not always going to be the answers that people want to hear, but, we'll always try. Albert, what's going on? I think I also saw Intrigue here, too. It's good to see you again. Ruckus says, will newer LUMIX cams support the L mount? Asking because Canon shifted to a new mount system which is not backwards compatible. Not sure I understand what you mean support the L mount. Our S-series cameras are all L mount. So yeah, all of the lenses in the L mount are, it's a standard, so there's not really anything about backwards compatibility. Even the Leica SL lenses that came out before it was called the L mount, and I think even further back to the TL mount and CL, they all work on the L mount. So yeah, there's no issue there, and full frame cameras will always be the L mount. Micro Four Thirds cameras will always be the micro or G series cameras will always be micro four thirds mount. Phil says, as a longtime Panasonic Pro user, back to the DVX100, I'm really looking forward to more high-end cinema products, VariCam, EVA 1, and S1H. Please petition for full-frame VariCam or EVA 2 on L-mounts. We would definitely keep pushing on that. I think currently right now, if you look at it, since we're LUMIX, LUMIX is the consumer branch of Panasonic's imaging division. Panasonic Pro Video, which would be VariCam, EVA 1. Right now, I can only speak to the S1 series of products or the S5 product, stuff like that. Or now the box camera product. Our BS1H and BGH1s, I think, were the first to kind of like bridge a bit of that gap to where you've got kind of a more cinema-ish focused, more production-focused bodies, but they're under the LUMIX ecosystem. So, it's the start of that kind of category for us, and if people are enjoying them and finding use for them, that helps further develop down the line for more products like that. Steve, anything you can share about Panasonic coming out with new point-and-shoot cameras? I mean, there were comments in the past about how point-and-shoot cameras in general, you're going to see maybe a little bit more of a pare down in some of those, but truthfully, we haven't really made any formal statements about point-and-shoot, at least that I'm aware of. Point-and-shoot cameras, like a lot of cameras that you see across the board, there was a period where you had so many different ones that had so much overlap that right now you're going to start seeing maybe some of them start to condense down into more cohesive line. Because while, yes, having 20 different versions of a point and shoot is cool, if you've got more focused versions of each kind of category in the different steps, you can make better products that way. So, yeah. And hopefully that answers what you're asking about. Beauty products, any update on new camera autofocus? Well, I mean, I really don't know what you want me to say. We've gone on record before saying that nothing is out of the realm of possibility, and all things are always being evaluated. So, just got to kind of wait and see what happens at this point. Let's see here. FC, are there any monitor display requirements for viewing 4K 120 video capture with the GH6? At 120, it's used for slow motion, but just curious about display requirements, if any. Yeah, so if you have a GH6 right now, you can tell that the GH6 doesn't actually support 120 frames per second 4K video output. You can do RAW, but video output goes down to 60 frames, and a lot of that's because recorders and monitors that are in the photo video world, to my knowledge, I don't believe there are any that actually support the HDMI 2.1 spec, which is needed for the bandwidth requirements to do 4K 120 frames per second video feed out. Video feed and raw data are two separate entities, even though it's the same cable. So most likely, when you see a monitor come out that can actually support 4K 120, and it's usually going to be classified as HDMI 2.1 or HDMI 48 gigabit, that's when you'll start seeing cameras support the video output of 4K 120. We see it in TVs and computer monitors because graphics cards support HDMI 2.1 or DisplayPort 1. Whatever the heck they're at now. The new AMD graphics cards are pushing the new one, which I think is like 8K 96 frame per second or something. And that's one thing, but that's a different spec on the HDMI associations, kind of what their spec lists are, what the intended device's use is. Cameras is a different category, so until you've got another device in the camera side, monitor-wise, that would support it, we just got to kind of be a little patient in that area at this point right now. But yeah, you'd want to look for HDMI 2.1 or 48 gigabit compatibility. Let's see. I got time for about 2 to 3 more questions, and then I actually do have to call this stream right at 2 o'clock here, Central Time at least. Let's take a look here. and see. Is it possible to record 4K 60 10-bit 422 with the S5 without recording RAW via Atomos Ninja 5? Well, you could do 4K 60p, which would be in 10-bit out over HDMI to an external recorder, and that would be in ProRes. It'd be 422HQ or 422. But internally, no. It's going to be, I believe, 420 10-bit. Any advice for shooting anamorphic lenses like Sirui on 5.8K? Whatever lens you're going to be using, make sure you factor in what its D-squeeze is going to be. If it's a 1:3:3 D-squeeze, those are typically going to give you the proper D-squeezed ratio for CinemaScope when you shoot in 16:9. If you're going to be shooting in 5.8K full open gate on the GH6, you're going to want to look for a 2x D-squeeze lens. That'll give you a proper, not proper, what people kind of naturally associate as CinemaScope and what you would envision in your mind you want to see. You'd want to be working with 2x lenses. If you're in a full frame camera, in like the S1H, and you're doing 6K open gate, that's where you would look at, I believe it's a 1.8x would get you the proper D-squeeze ratio. I did a stream a number of months back with Matt Fraser where he talks about the different D-squeeze ratios and what you'd want to look at. And I also know that there's a video over on Videomaker that was an interview that Matt did with them. If you take a look for them, it's either on their Vimeo channel or it's on their website, and that's Videomaker again. They would have a lot of kind of info as to which lenses you'd want to look at for which aspect ratio you are recording in. Let's see here. Douglas says, sorry, I meant your chat spending time on stills instead of video. Oh, okay. I get your question now, Douglas. Yeah, 100%. I would love to do more streams on stills specifically. If that is something that people want, sound off in the chat. Actually, really, I'm going to start changing that. If for topics that you want to see us in the future, leave a comment after the video, not in the chat. Once the video's up, drop it in chat, not in chat. It's going to take a while to get used to that. Drop the comment in the video after it's posted. That's much easier for me to see and go through and then actually take a quantitative look at what are people asking to see. So yeah, if you want to see more stuff that is photo-based or certain topics-based, at the end of these videos, at the end of these streams, drop your recommendations down in the comments, and I'll be able to actually go through that and get a better idea for everybody. Let's see here. FC, what if LiDAR misses the subject? How narrow is the LiDAR beam? That's another issue with LiDAR. It's typically relatively focused and you're locked in the middle of the frame because you have to direct it. Anyone that's been pulled over by a cop, you've been tagged with a LiDAR. So that's usually it's a LiDAR. That's how they read it. And usually there's a relatively small field of view that they can actually track and pull it in. It's the same logic with some of this stuff too. So yeah. Let's see here. The last question that I'll answer, and then I do have to call it for today, unfortunately, is how difficult is it to incorporate both END and IBIS in a box series camera? Very, very, very difficult. With the caveat of depending on what the size of the camera is that you're trying to go for. Electronic NDs or any kind of internal ND in the camera, there are trade-offs that you have to consider. An electronic ND is never truly clear. You lose at least a stop of light of transmission just by having that glass in front of the sensor. So that's challenge one. Is that a trade-off that you're willing to do just to have an ND in the camera? The alternative is you use an internal ND system that physically moves out of the way, which means that you have to have double the area, vertical or horizontal, of what your sensor area is, because you need an area to park that piece of glass or those optic pieces of glass for your ND. So that's challenge two. So that means that size can't be as small as the box cameras are currently. Second part of the question about stabilization in a box style camera, this comes down to philosophy. Typically, box style cameras and cinema style cameras will not have in-body stabilization in them if they're in a professional sense. The reason being is that in-body stabilization never mechanically locks in place. They are always held in by magnets, at least in the modern days. I know, magnets, how do they work? The logic there is that in a professional sense, the stabilization, because it can't be formally locked in place mechanically, it's not reliable enough for a true professional cinema or cinema application, which adds variability to the product in the real world for that application. So that's usually why you don't see that. So roundabout answer there, incredibly difficult to find the right mix of those two things together. All right, everybody, with that, I have to call it today. I do actually have another meeting and kind of thing I have to do today. So thank you all so much for jumping back in live. It was great to catch up with a lot of you, and hopefully you learned some new stuff here. We will be on a recorded schedule for the next 3 weeks through the first week of January. The first week of January, we will be actually doing a stream. Actually, those will be live streams, but we're going to be doing them from CES out in Las Vegas. So you won't want to miss that. We'll have schedules up soon. The next 2 weeks are fully recorded, so I look forward to bringing you guys some more information over the next couple of weeks. With that, I hope you all have a great rest of the holiday season. If I don't talk to any of you on different platforms, have a safe and enjoyable holiday. Have a great new year. And yeah, we will be back. Fresh start in the new year with LUMIX Live in person again after that. So with that, take care. Have a good weekend. Talk to you all next week. Couple of weeks in live. Later.